Hi, this is Chris Richards, and I'm the Eclectic Radical. And thanks for joining me this evening. Tonight, my special and last-minute guest, to who I am very grateful, is Kennedy Cooper of Not Safe for Wonks.
Hey, hey.
Which is a podcast that you should be listening to if you're not already, because the simple fact is I only watch one YouTube show most of the time, and that's Tim Black. And I only listen to one podcast most of the time, and that's these guys.
Well, thank you, Chris. That's a very warm compliment. Great welcome. Honestly,
Yeah,
I'm just glad to be hanging out.
I'm glad to have the company. I was thinking I was going to be doing a show alone tonight, so this is cool.
Well, luckily, this whole Boogaloo Boys, thinking about who do we make alliances with kind of talk is something I've been thinking about a lot too. And, there's ways in which we agree. There's ways in which we disagree slightly. And I thought, heck, we could probably have a pretty productive conversation.
Well, I think you and I probably agree on more than we disagree. I think that the people that we know with whom we would disagree have made themselves fairly vocal. I still have people on Twitter telling me that, well, no, they say they're not white supremacist. Well, yeah, William Pierce said he wasn't white supremacist back in the 90s when I was a kid, but he still wrote the Turner Diaries under an assumed name.
Yeah. When Heather Heyer died in Charlottesville, right?
Yep.
What did all the orgs, what did the Proud Boys and all the other orgs do the next day? They came out and said, we're not white supremacists. We don't condone this.
Yeah.
That's their mode of operation.
Everybody denies what they are. David Duke all the time. I'm not a white supremacist. Even the American Nazi Party. And now I'm going to tell you, how subtle can you really be when you've got Nazi hanging right out there? Right. They were the American Nazi Party. So, you can only hide so much. Even the American Nazi Party did joint events with the Nation of Islam to try to prove that they weren't racist. Because, of course, Elijah Muhammad was pro-segregation too. He was a black nationalist. So groups that both like the idea of segregation had no problem working with each other.
Right.
That did not make the American Nazi Party less Nazi. It was actually in their presidential platform the one time that they ran a candidate that if elected, he was going to forcibly deport all the black people in the U.S. to Africa. It was in the platform.
Yeah.
Yet you would see these pictures of the American Nazi Party with the Nation of Islam people to show that the American Nazi Party wasn't racist. Not really.
And listen, there has been the rare occasion here and there where a leftist group got a little bit of actual important material help from a group that you wouldn't expect it. And that's okay. It's okay if these things occasionally happen. Yeah. It doesn't mean that we have to start trusting groups that are obviously untrustworthy because once or twice they showed up with cookies for the bake sale and somebody decided to say yes to their cookies or whatever, right? Like, I would turn them away personally. I'd say your cookies aren't welcome at the bake sale. But that's me.
And I agree with you, and I'm just bringing this one up because this is important enough that I wanted to jump on it. This is absolutely true. It's not the same.
It's not the same.
But at the time, Elijah Muhammad and George Lincoln Rockwell thought they could gain something by working together, so they did.
Well, that's what I was just saying. I won't necessarily say, oh, that could never happen, or, oh, your leftist group is bad if you ever took a helping hand when you needed one. Sometimes you just need like a certain number of people to help out with something. You can't necessarily take the time to vet all of them or whatever. I don't know. I'm just saying that, like, or you like in this situation, like you just decide that, you can get closer to your interests by working with this person. It's not, it doesn't necessarily make it as despicable as what the white nationalists who are trying to manipulate people are doing, in every case or anything like that, you know, but at the same time, like, it doesn't excuse what the white nationalists are doing, because they have occasionally showed up and offered a helping hand to someone and been accepted because that person was desperate.
No, and that's true. And there's a saying, and I believe in this saying. I think that a lot of people in the Democratic Party are the living embodiment of this saying. There are no permanent allies. There are no permanent enemies. There are only permanent interests. And that's true. However, those permanent interests can be very widely in conflict. And there are things that people advocating for trying to recruit, not even necessarily joining up with, but trying to recruit Boogaloo Boys, trying to cure them from their problems and bring them to the left through our common bonds. Well, we can use our common hatred of capitalism.
They don't have that.
They're ANCAPs. They like capitalism. They want to get rid of restrictions on capitalism to let the capitalists run everything. That's not something we have in common.
No.
And that's the sort of thing that you're hearing, because apparently Magnus gives good interview. Now, it's great that Magnus gives good interview. And hey, maybe Magnus is somebody who can be brought over to the left if somebody works real hard at it. And if so, great. But he also said in a thread that he thought Kyle Rittenhouse was in the right, and that it's okay, and that you can believe that property is worth killing people for and still support nonviolent protesters who are attacking imperialist property, essentially.
I have to say, like, I'm forced to assume that this person was in good faith. I had someone on Twitter literally act shocked when I showed them the Twitter thread. And it's like, you couldn't guess that was a veneer. You know, listen, when the fascists have a big platform, they use it wisely.
Mm-hmm.
They do not get on a big platform and act like insane people that are going to be immediately discounted. Because how else would they grow their movements? Because it's not just us who would be offended if he, you know, went on the show with a swastika armband acting like a villain from a 60s film. Right? It would be, everyone would be offended.
If he were that obvious about it, there would be some conservatives in both political parties who I believe are actual white supremacists who would still be up in arms about it because of the swastika armbands.
Exactly. So with that in mind, if they can't even you know, do that without scaring off potential prime recruits, then of course they're going to, when they're have an opportunity to be on a big platform, use it wisely. And the Boogaloo Boys have in particular, like, really thought a lot about how to infiltrate our spaces, the left, how to use our language. And people think that sometimes it seems like people think anyone who uses the right code words is safe.
Yes.
Like, if you say Medicare for all, you're safe.
Like, only actual leftists have ever read Marx and are capable of quoting Marx. No one can read Marx and quote Marx to fuck with you.
Yeah. It's definitely not like Barack Obama just released a book about this.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, so Magnus goes on a show, he gives some of the right signals, he doesn't say anything super offensive, and Jimmy Dore gives him an absolute pass, which is its own very weird thing, because Jimmy Dore is someone who doesn't give anyone a pass. When's the last time you've seen Jimmy Dore just give a guest a blank check? He doesn't do that.
Unless you're Tulsi.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? That's the last time.
This is someone who's as special to Jimmy Dore as Tulsi. That's a disturbing thought that I hadn't had before just now. Thanks.
I mean, I have to draw some weird conclusions because literally Jimmy Dore's entire personality on his show is he brings you on his show to yell at you. Like, that's,
even if he agrees with you, he's yelling at you about what he agrees with.
Yeah, he yells at his best friends. He yells at his enemies. He yells at everybody, except apparently the white nationalist. That guy, the only thing Jimmy pushed back on, because I did watch some of it, the only thing Jimmy seemed to push back on was the issue of healthcare. When Magnus was like, I think a private option is better. Jimmy was like, whoa, all this racism and genocide was fine, but you're fucking with healthcare?
And that's the thing, is that people are just so willing to believe, oh, no, we're not racist. We support Black Lives Matter. When there is an info drop done by Antifa hackers from the Boogaloo Boys server that shows people talking about, well, we'll tell people we support Black Lives Matter to get them on our side.
Yep.
We'll tell people we're anti-ICE and for open borders to get them on our side.
And let's just be clear. BLM has gotten upset with Socialist Rifle Organization for showing up unannounced with guns. BLM does not like it when a group shows up unannounced with guns at one of their protests because it escalates things. It puts people into danger, especially if the people with guns are white, because they are endangering the brown people who don't have guns that are next to them. That's how this works in those situations. And so BLM will absolutely throw completely 100% verified well-meaning groups like SRA out of a protest if they show up unannounced. They damn well don't want the Boogaloo Boys there. This whole perception that the Boogaloo Boys were welcome is a fiction that they're creating.
Here in Portland, the Boogaloo Boys killed a cop and let Antifa take the blame for it. There were several there was a drive-by that was committed by somebody, apparently associated with somebody that Andy Ngo immediately tried to blame on Antifa, but was more likely a Boogaloo Boys type group. Their whole point is to try to start a shooting war between the cops and other groups.
I think a lot of people in America just can't quite grapple with this sort of dispersed terrorism yet. They still expect the terrorists in America to be like the terrorists that we've seen overseas and in videos and things like that. These groups that love to take all the credit for the things that they do. And who come out publicly and say, yes, that was us. We bombed that. We did that. We killed those people, whatever. The white nationalists don't do that. They don't take credit for their bombs. They don't take credit for their killings. They immediately disavow. It is a completely different kind. They disavow. You don't even have to kill people to get disavowed. The Capitol Hill protesters are now being called Antifa plants by a lot of these QAnon fascist types. Like, they'll disavow you the second you're in trouble for anything.
One of the senior, I hate to use their word, one of the senior officers of the Michigan militia. Now remember, the Michigan militia is one of the original groups in the 90s that started this whole white separatist shit.
Right.
But one of the senior officers from the Michigan militia went on MSNBC and disavowed that whole thing. He said, don't be claiming us. Don't have anything to do with us. We would never do something like this. It was this real, and you're watching the people reporting on it take it at face value. And it's like, huh?
Where do you think the resources came from to get all those people on planes and shit?
Exactly.
You know? The conservatives, they always talk about, the George Soros checks bussing in Antifa,
Yeah.
blah blah. They literally do that shit
Yes.
on the right, and then people don't ask enough, where did the money come from?
Or the thing that annoys me the most, one of the two things that annoys me the most, and they're linked together, and I'll say why at some point, but the two things that annoy me the most are, number one, this desire to think the best of almost everyone, whether you really should or not, except whatever group you personally don't like. And then whatever group you personally don't like, you always think the worst of them. But you still, there are leftists, so-called leftists, or say, well, they're working class. This was an expression of working class rage against the government. We need to recruit these angry working class people. How do angry working class people get the guns and vehicles to move across the country? Travel is not easy. I'm a working class person. There is nothing I would not have liked better than to participate in some sort of big march on the Capitol for the actual inauguration, see all those Medicare for All supporters there. Mm-hmm. But I'm poor. I can't travel.
Right. I can't just scrape together the money for a plane ticket out of nowhere. That's not something, or add to that also hotel and other things. I can't do that. There have been plenty of protests that are national protests that I would have loved to attend. I can't afford those sorts of things. I can sometimes not even afford to attend a protest that's an hour away. And so, to suggest that these are poor folks. No, these are not poor folks at the Capitol. There might have been one or two, but.
Well, you got to figure some of the people who were bussed in were poor people. But
sure.
Then you have to ask, when you know how some of these right-wing groups astroturf, remember that there were people, while there were real Tea Party patriots, there were also people in Tea Party protests who were hired to carry signs by Grover Norquist's super PAC. When have they had any shame about just hiring people to provide bodies for whatever they wanted to do?
Well, the best part is when you're working with a true believer, you don't even have to hire them at a full rate.
That's the thing is, I'm not going to say there are no working class true believers. I don't think that the working class is somehow angelic and saintly,
right?
In an unrealistic way. Sure, there are statistically there are working class Trump supporters, but statistically they're not the majority of Trump supporters.
No.
And when we talk about working class anger, it really seems to me that a lot of the time we're talking about white people being angry.
There is something interesting about that, isn't there? Like, whenever white people get angry, for some reason, those people need to be our allies. Mm-hmm. And I want to be even clear. Whenever straight white people get angry, those people need to be priority allies. But then whenever it's a marginalized group expressing anger, I don't know. Don't you think the trans community is a little rage-filled online these days?
The leftists, the quote-unquote leftists, who would say things, no, Black Lives Matter is just a liberal identity group that doesn't want anything that'll actually help anyone. No. Police not shooting black people would mean that, by definition, they would also shoot less white people. They would shoot less brown people. They would shoot less trans people. They would shoot less indigenous people. They would shoot less gay people and less poor people. Because there's one of the things that one of the queer black lesbians of the Combahachie Collective said was, if we're free, then everyone's free. If we're really making the most marginalized people in our society safer, then that means all the other marginalized people and all the people who aren't marginalized as much are safer too.
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%. It really feels weird, like it seems like to some leftists, you were kind of touching on this before, but I'm going to take it even further. To some leftists, everyone is a potential ally except the people that agree with you on almost everything.
It seems like that.
Like,
I mean, well, let's take it. I'll give you the best example. Neither one of these people is who I would consider a real leftist in a lot of ways. I think that they end up sheepdogging a lot of people in the wrong direction in different ways. But let's take Jimmy Dore and Sam Seder. Jimmy Dore and Sam Seder would both be a lot less annoying and a lot more likable if they didn't have such a problem with each other. How much of Sam Seder's stupidity has been related to thinking that something had to be wrong just because Jimmy Dore said it? And how much of Jimmy Dore's stupidity is him getting pissed at Sam Seder and wanting to be more contrarian as a result?
And having similar reactions, like you just said. Yeah. I mean, it's like as soon as it's something Sam is associated with, Jimmy and his fans, because like that was one of the weird things. I'm not a Jimmy fan, and that's well known. I do not like Jimmy Dore. I also am not a huge Sam Seder fan. I dislike him a little less, you know, like I most of that just has to do with my personal associations with how I was radicalized, maybe.
I would also say, and this is just a guess, I would say from my personal perspective, as a trans person, it makes sense for you to dislike Jimmy more than Sam because Jimmy has a little bit of a history there.
Yeah, one of them platforms TERFs, and one of them tends not to.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just start there. And this actually, this is funny because this actually gets to the root of something I've been thinking about a lot, which is that, listen, liberalism is terrible, okay? It's terrible. I'm not trying to defend it. And it feels like people come at me sometimes like I am, just because I'm critical of things more than liberalism sometimes. And I just want to say this for the record. A fully openly fascist society would be worse than a fully openly neoliberal society.
Well, so
that's just how it works. Like
so
they're both horrible.
I will disagree just a little bit here, because there's a great Tommy Douglas quote, the great prophet of the plains in Canada, the man who gave them their national health care. He said that fascism is not somebody in a brown shirt or a green shirt. Fascism is when the ruling class realizes that the poor people are using political democracy to try to get economic democracy for themselves, so they attack political democracy. Now, neoliberalism and open fascism both do that, and they are both fascists. And I really have to point out, because I'm thinking so much of marginalized communities today and less about myself, a lot of indigenous people would tell you that America is fascist and it doesn't matter which political party is in power because of their experience.
For the record, I would agree with that. This is one of the weird things, because I've clearly been saying that for a long time, and I don't understand the certain attacks that I get when it's like, I'm very clear about the fact that like America is a fascist project, just innately. I totally agree with that. What I'm really trying to get at, though, is that if a relatively pure, now neoliberalism and fascism are compatible too. I'm going to say that as well. But if a very pure version of liberalism was able to reign, as compared to a very loud and pure version of fascism.
Now there I agree completely.
That's what I'm. Yeah.
Now, see, the trouble was the neo,
right?
Because of course, actual pure liberalism isn't neoliberalism.
Yeah,
it's the left liberal populism that the neoliberals deliberately killed. And the reason they deliberately killed it is because that's the gateway drug to all the better stuff on the actual left. I mean, we can say all we want that we think, and I'll just use this as an example. I have lots of friends who are DSA people, so I'm not agreeing with this. But there are lots of people who call the DSA a liberal group and not a socialist group. And I don't agree with that, even though I think there are some people affiliated with the DSA who are kind of liberal. But
yeah,
the people associated with the DSA, even on the liberal side, are people who actually feel the need for populist change from the bottom up. And they may still be liberals, but they have made that first step, and they have chosen to openly associate with a group with socialist in the name. And I really feel that no matter how frustrated we might be with some of the more liberal people who call themselves democratic socialists or social democrats.
And they can be plenty frustrating.
Yes, they can. As obnoxious and annoying and wrong as they can be sometimes, they are still on our side. And their mistake is their attitude towards the neoliberal establishment, which is to believe that they can somehow be friends with it and get it to do what they want.
Right. I think we fundamentally agree here for the most part. I think
yes.
The issue for me with a lot of this stuff is that this comes down to like accelerationism. And the issue with accelerationism is that the lives that you're bargaining with are real. And if you tell me we could have the revolution under liberalism, it'll take a little longer, but less poor people will die. Or we can have the revolution come faster under accelerationist fascism, but a lot of poor people will die. I'm going to consider the slower route because these are my friends and family.
Well, I mean, it's like we joke about Possadism a lot, and we have dolphins in our Twitter handles and stuff like that, but I don't think most of the people in Dolphin Twitter actually want a bomb to drop.
No. If anything, it's more of just like a doomer acceptance of the fact that sometimes accelerationism can't be prevented in this horrible state that we live in, and that you have to kind of accept, the possibility that that may be the only route we have left is an accelerationist route. But the acceptance that that may be the only way we find out of this doesn't mean that we should just be happy about it or not look for alternatives until we're sure that that's the only option left, because accelerationism costs lives that don't deserve it. It costs the lives of marginalized people. It costs the lives of people that really just wanted to just get through another day.
Exactly. And it costs the lives of the most vulnerable people that we're supposed to be in solidarity with. And I don't see how you can be in solidarity with someone and just want to reach out to the people who want to kill them. And here is where I really think there's a cultural issue. Mm-hmm. And it's a cultural issue with white people and with people who have maybe been socialized with certain kinds of white mindsets, regardless of their origins. If somebody sees a guy who fits their stereotype of what the working class is supposed to be like, on one hand, and they see a guy who fits their stereotype of what a liberal is, on the other hand, it doesn't matter that the working class guy is really a petty bougie terrorist. And it doesn't matter that the liberal is really a socialist who's come on to talk about the Teamsters National Union selling out the local. This guy is a working class guy because he fits my personal stereotype of what a working class guy is like, which is somebody like me.
Right.
And they call the guy in the suit an elitist because he wears a suit and says, no, we shouldn't associate with fascists. And they think, oh, no, he's a snob who doesn't want to associate with the dirtbag. And it's like, no, he said fascists, not dirtbags.
It's both of these people are playing parts in effect. The Teamster guy is trying to dress up a little nicer because for a long time leftists have been criticized if we don't show up to the meetings acting like quote unquote professionals.
It's true.
And so this Teamster guy, he's doing this because this is what he knows gets him through doors a lot of the time. He's not doing it because, oh, I just love being in a suit and I'm a fancy, ooh. And even if he was, who the fuck cares? But I'm just saying he's not. He's doing it because he's just trying to open doors for leftists and for left-wing causes. That's how this shit works a lot of the time, is that you have to try to like capitulate a little bit to the wheels of power just to get in the door and try to make a change that could maybe help some people or save some lives. And I think, I don't know, it just really feels like a lot of the people that are willing to accept that there's no value in gradual change aren't suffering. Whereas like somebody like this understands that people are suffering in his community, and he's gonna, if he has to capitulate a little by wearing a suit to meetings, he's gonna learn that behavior and do it. Right. And so then if he shows up on a broadcast in a suit, it's because he thinks this is the best way to make people respect what he's about to say. And, this whole thing, this is like, we get into this on Twitter every week though, don't we? Where somebody's like, contractor, construction company owners are the working class, but teachers are traders or things like that.
Yeah. Teachers are bourgeois because they're teachers. It's like, no. You've seen what a teacher makes? It's like, if you work, and it's, I'm, as academically, my preferred class analysis is David Graeber's class analysis in Bullshit Jobs, which I have elaborated on a little bit, because I really believe that on an academic level, yes, our system is one of managerial feudalism. And because landlords, bosses, and everybody else are the only classes left in the world. I believe that. On an academic level, I think that is totally accurate.
Yes.
On a recruiting, political, metaphysical level, I like the IWW's explanation. There's the owners and the workers. People who own the shit and the people who work for the people who own the shit. I think that's very useful politically. I think it's oversimplification, but it's generally accurate, and it works very well for building a coalition. That said, as a movement, whether it's Trump, the Boogaloo Boys, the Proud Boys, any of these sort of fringy alt-right groups, the really hardcore true believers are people who are committed to what they believe. They're people, and they come from the bottom tier of the ownership class. People who have a little and want more and feel that they're being cheated out of it. Like, well, Trump. Because he's not really a billionaire. He's a low-grade millionaire. Trump might be poorer than Bernie for all we really know.
We have no idea.
We have no idea. We do know that he and his siblings were able to steal millions and millions of dollars from the American people by the way they laundered what would have otherwise been their highly taxed inheritance. But we also know that he's gone bankrupt at least twice and that big banks won't loan to him anymore. Even Deutsche Bank won't loan to him anymore.
That's pretty bad.
After the storming of the Capitol, Deutsche Bank was one of the corporations that said they weren't going to do business with the Trump organization anymore.
Oh, that's funny because, hitting him in the wallet, that's something that actually is going to upset him.
The PGA weren't ever going to consider a Trump club for a professional golf event ever. Also hits him in the wallet. I mean, that's the only way that golf clubs make money is if they host enough PGA events. Otherwise, their big money sucks.
Yeah.
The only real reason to own a golf club is to write it off your taxes. That explains them. And there really is this, but these lower tier ownership class folks, they're the people that the proverb, to the privileged, equality feels like oppression, is talking about.
Yeah.
And they don't like having to be the same as the folks that they see as beneath them. They want to be the same as the people above them.
Yeah. And let's be real, the upper tier of the working class has a similar aspect to it.
It does, and it can.
A lot of upper tier working class folks, and I don't usually draw a lot of attention to this because I want those people to know that actually you're still with us. It doesn't matter if you make six figures. You're not an owner, and you're still on our side for the most part. But I think when we're talking about a conversation like this, we do have to split the fine hair this time and say, actually, those people are not entirely trustworthy. And let me put it this way. This is something, just to paraphrase something I had said on Twitter earlier. If the professional managerial class, if some people that are PMCs are in your group and being allies, that's fine. They can be allies. But if an entire political movement seems to be controlled by PMCs, that is not for us.
You're talking about the Democratic Party now,
Oh, yes.
So, because and this is really the classic expression of what I think is American politics. The Democrats are the PMC party.
Yes.
The Republicans are the petty bougie party.
And see, that's the important
distinction. Played against each other by the same billionaire donors.
But I'm so glad you said that, though, because that's like the important distinction that's been missing from so much of this dialogue on Twitter. People say, yes, the Democrats are the PMC party, but they don't recognize that the Republicans are the petite bouge party. They think the Republicans are more representative of the working class than the Democrats. No, there are plenty of working class. In fact, if you go by the numbers of who votes who, there are more working class Democrats than Republicans. This is not high praise. This is just a fact.
Yeah. And the simple fact is, it's because there's this misunderstanding of who the working class is. There's the image all the way from the 70s, which isn't entirely true, of white guys in hard hats who cost George McGovern a presidential election. And that's been the supposed nightmare of the Democratic Party ever since. We don't want to go so far to the left that we lose the working class again like McGovern did. Well, for starters, McGovern wasn't actually as far left as RFK.
No.
And RFK brought the working class in like crazy. Working class black people, working class white people, everybody.
Yeah.
And you had you had poor white farmers and poor black farmers in the segregated South lining up next to each other as his casket went by on the train. And then those same white people turned around and voted for George Wallace when they were going to vote for RFK. Now think about that.
Terrible. Terrible.
Now, why did it happen like that? Why did they vote for George Wallace instead of Eugene McCarthy or even Hubert Humphrey?
Well, I would say, in my opinion, it has to be at least in part because they're not educated, right? Like they're not properly, these people were not properly educated into the reasons why they should be doing this. And were instead following an icon. But I'm saying like, they weren't educated into the reasons why they should continue to side with the marginalized people, specifically what I'm saying. Well, and they were following an icon more so than they were following policy. That's what I think.
And that's very likely true. But there's another part of it too. I think this comes back to Jimmy Dore. There are people, what they value is your attitude towards the establishment. Not whether you actually want to help people or whether you want to kill everybody, but whether you like or hate the establishment. And if you're anti-establishment and you have a really burn it all down prejudices against the system, which I will say on record are justified.
Yeah.
You are attracted to other people who sound like they want to burn it down. If you want Bobby Kennedy to burn the system down, and Hubert Humphrey sounds like he's going to maintain the system, and Richard Nixon is the system, but there's this George Wallace guy who sounds like he wants to burn it all down too, and you want to burn it all down, who are you going to choose? Especially if you don't know a lot about Wallace.
You're literally describing the Obama-Trump swing voter, which we know was a large enough percentage to not entirely discount as a political phenomenon.
The Obama-Trump swing voter and the Obama-Trump and the Obama-stay-home swing voter are what won Trump the election, those two groups. And it's not people in New York and California voting for the Green Party. Sorry, Susan Sarandon haters. It's people in Michigan not going to vote. And a lot of those people in Michigan who didn't go to vote were sort of progressive people who didn't think either candidate was offering them anything, and black people who thought they were both racist. That whole black exit thing that was going on that everybody's tried to blame on the Russians was exactly the sort of thing that leftists have been talking about since. Don't vote for the Democrats if you want them to actually do something for you the next time. If you don't vote for them and they lose, they might actually have a reason to want your vote and do something for it. But if you keep voting for them and they win, or you keep voting for them whether they win or lose, whether they help you or not, what's their motivation?
Yeah.
And trying to blame that on Russia was one of the most disgusting things that the Democratic Party did.
It really is, because it's a fundamental non-recognition of why people feel a certain way. I don't entirely agree with every thought by every person who ever said, I'm going to, reach out to the Trump administration and see if he'll do something for black rights. But I get the point that many people made that were in that position, which is that we don't trust any of these fuckers. And I get it. Now, do I agree with the strategy? No, I think you would be better off appealing to someone besides the Trump crime family, personally, but it worked out for some people, so fuck it. Why not try, right?
and at the same time, I understand why some people would think, maybe not so much before, but definitely after the NAACP Zoom call, that maybe Biden wasn't going to help anybody either.
Yeah. I think two bad things can be bad simultaneously, and I think a lot of people read just looking for any solution that seems okay into these things that are more complicated than they have to be. If a really compelling third party takes over my local elections and is running candidates to the left as that third party, I'm going to support that wholeheartedly. If somebody makes the choice to run as a great progressive Democrat, I might continue to support them too. Not because I love the Democratic Party, but because that's the solution that you're talking about. We have to withhold the votes until there's something worth voting for. If there's something worth voting for, I'll consider going out. It might be I've gone out and voted for just one or two boxes on a ballot because I didn't believe in any of the other fuckers.
I will say, because this guy was one of the real gems in the primary season, and he got exactly the treatment you would expect from some leftists who care more about the letter after the name than they should. If I lived in Kansas this most recent voting cycle, I would have run out and re-registered as a Republican so I could vote for Brian Matlock for Senate in the primary.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that's because the guy was an open socialist, running on open socialist ideas that were actually to the left of Bernie's platform. And people were attacking him for being a Republican. Oh, he must be some sort of crazy anti-gay rights, anti-abortion guy if he's running as a Republican socialist. No. He just thinks that's the way to win in Kansas. The same way that person you're yelling at for running as a Democrat instead of an independent in New York is running as a Democrat.
Right. They're just using whatever tools. And I think that we should be entirely pragmatically and without bias using these tools. Like, that is truly how I feel about it.
I have two sets of feelings. And they are, and which one wins out really depends on whether, on how good or bad a mood I'm in. So, and when I'm in a thoughtful mood, I ask other people what they think to try to refine my feelings off other people's feelings. Relatable. But so there are two equal competing goals among democratic socialists in America historically. On one hand, you've got Eugene Debs and Norman Thomas, who said we have to have a working class party. We have to have a working class party. We cannot support capitalist parties.
Yeah.
Now, Debs believed that very strongly because he had supported both Grover Cleveland and Benjamin Harrison for president.
Right.
For anybody who doesn't know this, Grover Cleveland is our only president who served non-consecutive terms. He won the presidency. I can't remember the name of the guy he beat the first time.
Me neither.
Had big scandals related to union busting and the economy, and was beaten for re-election by his Republican opponent Benjamin Harrison, who he then beat in a second election between the two of them to retake the presidency, because Harrison ran into the same union busting trouble, which comes down to the point that the reason Debs didn't like the Democrats or the Republicans and believed we needed a socialist party was because he had helped get Grover Cleveland elected as a friend of workers. And Grover Cleveland sent Pinkertons to break strikes, because the government actually hired Pinkertons for stuff back then.
Yep.
And then Benjamin Harrison ran against Cleveland saying, we can't just kill our working class. They have rights. And then his solution was to hire more Pinkertons than Grover Cleveland. So Grover
this
Cleveland
is weirdly has some parallels to the fascists lying about their intentions thing we were talking about earlier.
It does. It also, you can also really see the in Trump's term, and then Biden's running against Trump, knowing what Biden is, you can really see that Cleveland Harrison energy there too.
Well, and at this point, both parties are just gonna make it worse. It seems, you know what I mean? Like it's like they both run on, wow, look at how bad the other guy did the thing, and then they do it worse.
And so both both Eugene Debs and Norman Thomas at different times believed, even if we can't actually win elections, we need to have our own party that will only talk about our issues and will not compromise with the capitalists. And, you know, we got the progressive era when Debs' Socialist Party was around. And we got the New Deal when Norman Thomas's Socialist Party was around. So they might not have been wrong. That's number one. They never actually won the presidency, but they influenced policy immensely.
Yeah.
Their parties forced the Socialist Party during the 30s forced the Democratic Party to be much more left than FDR ever would have been if there was not a Socialist Party and a CIO.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's that. And then you have the other side of things. Max Schachtman, Bayard Rustin, Michael Harrington for all our DSA fans. All people who believed in what is called realignment. We can turn the Democratic Party into a left-wing working class party if we put the effort into it. And that seemed to be working for a little while. Lyndon Johnson had the Great Society. Nixon did, even though Nixon was by no means a progressive, he signed some progressive bills that were passed by the Democrats in Congress in his first term. That said, what have we seen from that strategy since Lyndon Johnson?
I hear you. I think, to me, though, I think there's a little bit of a false dichotomy in we're either reforming the Democratic Party or we're making a working class party that supports our interests. And I think the DSA has done a relatively good job of trying to demonstrate that that's potentially a false dichotomy and that we could have a little bit of the best of both worlds, in the sense that the DSA has managed to make itself a relatively unaccountable working class party that can't really be brought to kneel by the Democrats. But
I agree. They've knelt.
Chapter to chapter is what I would say on that front. Like chapter to chapter, it varies a lot. And I will say too, I was as skeptical as it gets about the DSA when people first started trying to talk me into it. And
I'm not trying to bash them. I'm just describing their relationship with the Democrats.
And I would say chapter to chapter, it varies a lot for sure.
That's true.
But I would point out, groups like the Denver DSA, that was able to get that person whose name I can't think of, unfortunately, right now, onto city council that, helped to get private prisons eliminated in Denver city limits and things like that. Like and so I think the DSA has been able to prove that there might be a way to bridge that gap. I'm not saying they always do it perfectly or that the DSA is entirely coherent at this stage or things like that. But I think they have proven that. What I would say, though, is I'm just not a vanguardist. I don't think any party's going to get us there.
So now here's where I am a vanguardist, but vanguard parties do not necessarily get us places by winning. The purpose of a vanguard party is to grow a movement. In theory, and the degree to which left-wing parties do this varies, but in theory, a vanguard party is composed of professional revolutionaries whose whole business is to grow, organize, and keep a movement going. And then everybody else coalesces around that. And I think that actually makes sense. I didn't used to be a vanguardist, but more and more, I think some sort of vanguardism is what we're going to need. And I think that one of them, and it doesn't matter whether it comes from outside the Democratic Party or inside. What matters is that people in the vanguard, whether they're inside or outside the Democratic Party, are in solidarity when it comes time to do something. And this is what makes me so mad, is you have people who would rather join with the Boogaloo Boys than AOC on the one hand, and you have people on the other side who would rather mock them for rather joining with the Boogaloo Boys than AOC, than find out what has been done so wrong to make people lose so much faith. Because I think it's unrealistic to say at this point that we should just trust AOC because everything she's done up to this point has been right. I think that train has left the station.
Yeah. And we knew it probably would. I mean, the thing is once somebody spends a little time in these offices, every day is another chance to disappoint you, basically. So I personally am not surprised. But again, I'm not a vanguardist. So my only sincere goal with this stuff is harm reduction. If AOC is more likely to bring me harm reduction than Dan Crenshaw, then I'm more likely to call AOC's office than Dan Crenshaw's office.
But that's
right.
About that.
But that's about as far as it goes.
But that's the thing, though. If you live in Dan Crenshaw's district, as weird as it sounds, it'll actually do you more good to call his office.
Sure. Yeah, you should always call your rep first.
And that's especially true if your rep is progressive. If your rep is progressive, they're the one you should be bullying. Because I'm sorry, I understand people don't like hearings. Don't make enemies of our allies. If they're going to be made enemies by being pushed to do what they were elected to do by the socialists whose support got them there, then they need to be bullied some.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of having these organizations. What good is it to have people who supposedly represent the left in Congress if they're not listening to the left? If you're in the left in AOC's district, AOC is absolutely who you should be calling about Medicare for all.
Agreed.
If you're on the left in Susan Bonamici's district, where, like me, she's the one you should be calling, even though she probably isn't for Medicare for all, despite the fact that she says she is. But the fact that she says she is and probably isn't is all the more reason to bully her.
Yeah.
And if your congressperson is a Republican, then you say, hey, my wife's diabetic and she might die. What are you going to do for me?
You never know. You never know what you might be able to influence through that kind of pressure, which is, again, part of why I said I'm purely pragmatic about this stuff. I don't care. Democrat or Republican, they're both bad in terms of the parties. The Republicans are a smidge worse, but it's not enough to appreciate most of the time.
The way that I would never say the Republicans are worse. I would say that the Republicans are more uniformly the same.
Yeah. Well,
Not the Republican Party is worse than the Democratic Party. It's that more of the Republicans are as bad as their party.
Sure, because structurally,
yes,
they're the same.
Structurally, the Republican Party is actually a tiny bit better. Structurally, the Republican Party actually carries out Democratic primaries.
Where I would push back on that a little bit is just to say that there's a lot of variance in this stuff. In states like New York and New Jersey, the Democratic Party is a machine that is completely impenetrable.
Not just New York and New Jersey.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, I'm just trying to give some examples. Like there are plenty of states where the Democratic Party is a impenetrable machine of power. But there's also states where the Republicans have that kind of control, like North Carolina, for instance.
Well, North Carolina is weird, actually. The Republicans only have that control for really bizarre reasons. They had the legislature to redistrict at just the right time. And if they hadn't had it to redistrict when they had it, North Carolina is a majority blue state.
Well, but that's the thing about North Carolina. It's machine politics.
Yes.
So the thing is they had the control to redistrict at the right time because that's what they do, and they've been doing that for like hundreds of years in North Carolina.
Yeah, but originally it was Republicans, and then it was Democrats, and then all the Democrats became Republicans again.
Yeah. So but I would say that both machines are pretty terrible.
Yeah.
And the only real thing that tangibly makes the Democrats any better is that the Overton window of what kind of platform you can run on is a tiny bit more forgiving.
And that's really the thing.
That's it.
There are individuals in positions of power in the Democratic Party who suck a whole lot less than everybody else in the Democratic Party. More than just a few. And they managed to succeed despite the horrible party structure, even if it's not as often as we might like.
Yeah.
And while Bernie didn't win, we forced Barack Obama to pull strings and show that the Democratic primary was basically a bunch of people running to stop Bernie who all dropped out as fast as they could when one person needed to be the focus of all that support.
Yeah.
And I mean, it doesn't feel like it. And it may not feel like it for a long time. That was a win. By Vladimir Lenin's perspective, Barack Obama openly flouting the democracy of the Democratic Party like that was a huge win that exposed massive corruption and should put more stress on the system.
I mean, isn't that the point of a vanguard party, is to do agitation? And I mean, if you want to say, and listen, I say that I'm not really a vanguardist, but I will participate in vanguardism because of left unity. And Bernie definitely was a sort of ahead of the vanguard for the moment. Was he perfect? No. Was he, were there lots of things that could have been better about the way that he handled certain things? Absolutely. I'm plenty critical of Bernie Sanders. In fact, I'm far more critical of Bernie Sanders than most people on left Twitter. But he still brought the Democratic Party to its knees. And it wasn't, obviously, it was us. It wasn't really him. It was us.
Yes.
And I think that we can't lose sight of that power, because one of the things that reliably they have done to us over and over again is that when we get left populists close to the forefront of the party, they break up our movements and convince us to stop trying. Now, listen, I'm very frustrated with the Democrats. I would love to have other solutions come. I'm an anarchist. My other solutions can include a lot of things. But if 2024 comes and we have a chance to put a reasonable progressive in the White House, I'm going to try again. I'll promise you that right now. I will be out there again doing it, just like I did for Bernie. And I hope everybody else will feel the same by then. I really do.
I do, though I do have to say that I'm sorry very much to Michael Lightly, but I won't believe Gavin Newsom if he runs on single payer.
Yeah, and well, we have to do that kind of accountability, and we did that during the presidential cycle in terms of people stepping forward and saying, I live in this person's district. They're not who they're trying to say that they are. Pete Buttigieg really got nailed with this one, obviously, because he was trying to paint a whole picture of himself. That was this whole thing. And then people came out from South Bend and said, hey,
that's not who he is.
That's not who he is. And so, if Gavin Newsom tries to run as a progressive, it's important for people to come out and say that's not who he is, that know better.
No.
But it doesn't mean that there's not going to be someone that's passable. And to me, at this point, AOC could still be that person. Now, she's pretty low on my list right now, but she could still be that person. And I would be willing to put the effort in again because we were so close. And I just don't think we can lose sight of that. I don't think we can give in when we forced power to use all of its levers.
And that's the whole thing, is that we have to be able to do that. Though I do have to say at this point, I'm gonna bash Michael Lightly again. After his interview with Bree Joy, he wrote the same thing he said in his interview with her for In These Times. And he said in his piece for In These Times that Gavin Newsom ran for governor on single payer. Does he not know that Gavin Newsom reneged and that people in California are trying to get him recalled? Does Michael Lightly not talk to people in California?
No.
And if he doesn't talk to people in California, why is he so bullish on Gavin Newsom? I hadn't even planned to go in that direction, but
but it's all related. It all ties together, and we have to try to look at it from this bigger picture, like we're trying to sort of piece together here tonight, because too much of a limited view isn't getting us anywhere.
And if someone is able to understand that Gavin Newsom isn't really for Medicare for all, then they should also, in theory, be able to understand that what the fash says in interviews is not always reliable.
I mean, why?
He said he was anti-racist. Well, yes, he said he was anti-racist. Well, he said he was pro-LGBTQ+. Yeah, so did Hillary.
Let's assume for a moment that every political pundit and every politician lies about some things. Let's just assume that is true. Okay?
Except us, of course. Obviously, we don't lie.
Obviously not us. But let's assume that every political, politician and pundit and everything, all these people, they all lie about some things. Wouldn't you still assume that a fascist lies more? I don't get that part. That's the part that really baffles me.
That's the thing, is they don't accept the fascist part. They want to believe that he's some sort of leftist. And even people who do understand that he's a right-winger do not understand what an ANCAP is. An ANCAP is not an anarchist. Kennedy and I are anarchists. When we say that ANCAPs aren't anarchists, please believe us.
Please.
An ANCAP wants to take the power from the government and give it directly to the capitalists, so they have nothing to restrain them ever again. That is not anarchy. That is oligarchy and timocracy. A timocracy is when people who own everything are in charge.
Also, let's just remind that, this may not be the definition of fascism that everyone agrees with. It's not necessarily even my preferred definition of fascism, but a lot of people have described fascism as a merger of state and corporate power for a reason. Perhaps it is not a perfect analysis, but it is an analysis that comes from experiences that are bad.
Mussolini described it that way. Hitler described it that way. They both did it that way. They merged state and corporate power.
Gee, who does that benefit?
Well, that
doesn't benefit me.
It benefits the people who own stock in the corporations.
Yeah. Benefits the people who own those corporations, run those corporations.
Who owns most of that stock? Billionaires. You can talk all you want about my 401k. I would much rather have a strong Social Security program that I knew that was going to be there for me than a 401k.
I mean, it's just pretty much impossible to say that ANCAP philosophy is not fundamentally fascist. It is just a fundamentally fascist philosophy. So that alone should be enough to tell you. But I'm just going to keep repeating this point over and over again until I drill it into people's heads also, which is that there's like 10,000 flags that you could put on your wall. You do not have to choose a racist one. You do not have to be in the organization whose name is a joke that means race war. You could pick another org. If he doesn't believe in all that racist stuff, if he doesn't believe in all that fascist stuff, then he could pick an org that doesn't fly a fascist flag. As long as you have a swastika armband on your arm, it is reasonable to assume that you're a piece of shit, even if you say, actually, I'm one of the more complex and nuanced Nazis.
Well, and I will say that if you actually read history and actually know what the swastika means, what the Nazis did to it was really awful. And a really great symbol was ruined forever by these guys. But that's not a reason to use it now. That's a reason not to.
Yeah.
And there's even this superhero story from this anthology I read in the 90s where this guy gets lost in the hills and is found by the lost Dutchman, who somehow become immortal by stuff that he's learned from indigenous people. And he gives this guy Superman level powers to change the world and make it a better place. But he makes the guy Captain Swastika. And there's a big swastika on his chest. And the guy's, no, this isn't worth it. That's the attitude we really need to have about fascism.
Yeah. Because right now, it feels like there are people on the supposed left that are just waiting for the right opportunity to sell people like me out. Trans folks. To sell out other marginalized folks like Black people. Like Latino people. It really feels like y'all are just waiting for the right moment to use this as a bargaining chip when you talk about aligning with the Boogaloo Boys. That's what it feels like, because that's what you're proposing is a solution where you get your health care, but you give fascists power. What do fascists do with power? They kill marginalized people. And I just want to say I'm double terrified because I have a fair bit of Jewish family, Jewish heritage, and my cousin attends Tree of Life. She was late the day of the shooting. This is something I think about a lot, people. I want you to understand this. I don't talk about it a hell of a lot because it's a very dark and sad thing to even have to discuss about something that my family has been through, where my cousin was 15 minutes late to synagogue and lived because of it. This stuff is serious. This stuff is really serious. And when y'all are talking about aligning with those people, I just have to assume that you're just okay with me dying. And that's scary. That's really fucking scary to have to think about people that I would hope would be allies.
No, and that gets back to the cultural thing I was saying, where people have this image in their head of who's working class and who isn't. And if someone fits that image, oh, this person's an ally. And if someone doesn't fit that image, they're the enemy. We can't have anything to do with them. And it's based on these very strange cultural ideas that I don't always like.
Yeah.
And I really believe in class struggle, and I really think that class first is a real thing and should be a real thing. But that means class solidarity, not selling other people out because someone fits your image of a cool dirtbag.
I swear, I'm just going to say it. Us queer folks, we get a bad rap just because we look nice. We can't help it that we know how to groom ourselves. It doesn't mean that we have more money. Just because that's where we put some of it is into things like occasionally buying a nice shirt. And I just want to say this too, like, I'm 30. I'm trying to just live my life and fulfill like at least some of my dreams and wishes in this world. I've been poor my entire life. I've worn tons of hand-me-down clothing. I've had to just often just, you know, all my clothing budget for the year is like $20, and I got to take it to the thrift store and see what I can do. I've been in that kind of situation a lot in my life. And it's very frustrating to, you know, buy myself a couple of nice shirts so that I look nicer on the podcast and that I feel good about myself and that I'm enjoying myself and buying brand new clothing, something I've rarely done in my entire life. And to have people come at me and say, you're not real working class because I look kind of nice on camera. And I'm poor as shit. Okay. Trans people have some of the lowest net worth in America, and I'm not an exception. And I'm willing to admit that, even though it's painful to say because I don't want to be in this situation, but that's how it works. And, on the other hand, it's funny. I don't know what would lead people to assume that a group of straight white men is less likely to have been given lots of opportunities than me.
That's what's so bizarre about it. And so I just said I believe class first is real and it should be a thing. But you have to understand that not everybody in the class is in the same situation. There are different levels of privilege within a class. There are people within the working class who are tremendously privileged compared to the rest of us, and yet who are still insignificant compared to Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. And there are people in the ownership class who are only a tiny little bit richer than the best, than the highest paid, most privileged people in the working class. But that tiny bit makes a big difference. And while the people at the bottom of the one class and the top of the other might mingle to some degree, the reason that the PMC thinks of the petty bougie as the working class is because the upper tier of the working class is more educated and more cosmopolitan than the bottom tier of the owning class. I mean, let's face it, Mike Lindell cannot compare to Elizabeth Warren when it comes to credentials, but he's got more money.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But that raises another thing. We make fun of Mike Lindell being involved in the Trump administration, but nobody makes fun of Bill Gates and Elon Musk essentially being brought on by Bill de Blasio to write an education plan for New York City.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about how billionaires have been shaping education at the expense of the working class for generations. Well, they weren't billionaires for generations, but you know what I mean, the obscenely wealthy.
Did you notice how Bloomberg kind of admitted to this in one of the debates? Actually, even more interestingly, Trump and Biden kind of admitted to the way things are in one of their debates too. Because there was one particular moment, I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit because this was a little while ago and I don't remember exactly, but Trump and Biden were debating. I believe this is in the first debate. And Trump is saying, well, you know, you're responsible for these bad crime bills of the 90s. And Biden says, you helped write some of that legislation. And Trump backed off and said, well, I guess I did. Now, that's funny because Trump, we've always been told Trump has no political experience, that he's not a politics man. He hasn't served in a political office. How can someone like that have written policy?
He's a huge donor, and the donors write the policies.
Exactly. And I thought it was very interesting that they kind of admitted this subtly during the debate. Because they don't always talk about it outright, but this is the way things run. Is that, you know, back in the 90s when they were making these decisions, in the early 2000s when they were making some of these decisions, Joe Biden, who was an actual senator, and Donald Trump, who was just a rich guy, had about the same amount of influence over a piece of law that was being written.
Pretty much. How did Joe Biden put it in that one interview that got lots and lots of play? I went to the donors and I told themselves that I would prostitute myself for them. His words. Not mine. And so, I mean, there's tape of him saying this, and then people trash Zephyr Teachout for writing about him being corrupt. And force Bernie to denounce her and distance himself from the column. It's like
ridiculous.
The rewriting of history about Joe Biden is
disgusting.
I mean, I understand why people have a hard time not seeing the Democrats as harm reduction. I'm not sure there's anything harm reduction about Joe Biden.
Well, I think the issue is the party harm reduction, or does one of the parties allow more harm reduction? Because I would say it has to necessarily be the latter.
It does. And then the second question becomes harm reduction for whom?
Yes.
Which is very important.
Yeah. Because I don't think Joe Biden is doing harm reduction, for the record. You know, for anybody who thinks I'm some weird Joe Biden defender now, I don't think Joe Biden's doing any harm reduction. I don't think the election of Joe Biden instead of Trump is reducing harm significantly for anyone in particular. I think
not people in camps. They're still in camps.
As far as I can tell, COVID's basically going the same way. People keep talking about the 100 vaccines in 100 days being some special watermark, but Trump was talking about rolling the vaccine out fast too. They're both just giving their version of promises. I don't trust either of them to tell the truth, so I don't think that Biden's rollout plan is better necessarily.
I think we'll see I think we're more likely to see the Defense Production Act used, and I think we're more likely to see distribution of the vaccine improve. But that doesn't change the fact that until 80% of the population is vaccinated, we're still in a plague.
Yeah. And he's talking about reopening schools in the same time frame. So we're going to have a non-fully vaccinated populace and reopen schools. Yeah, that's harm reduction? No.
and people hate when I say this. If you live in Iran, there's a serious possibility that you're more at risk of harm because Joe Biden is president now.
Yeah.
Because sure, he wants to get them back into the treaty, he says. But in 2008, the difference between John McCain wanting to bomb Iran and Joe Biden wanting to bomb Iran was zero. They both wanted to bomb Iran. Joe Biden was for invading Iran when W wanted to do it. They didn't end up doing it. They couldn't get anyone to go along with them, but he was for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, heck, if I lived in any other country in the world but this one, I would want my leaders to be looking for a nuclear weapon now that Joe Biden is president.
I mean, I am concerned about the fact that what little harm reduction we might get here in America under Joe Biden might be offset globally. I am worried about that. This is something I talked about a lot. Is it better to offload our suffering? Is that worth anything? Because to me, as much as I would like to suffer less, I can't really justify that personally. I can't justify the idea of supporting imperialism just so that I suffer less, when what I would prefer is that, we all suffer less because we, create a system that's better for all of the working class. And that includes the people overseas.
Well, and that's the whole point. Socialism is supposed to be international. It's not workers of Germany unite. It's workers of the world unite.
Yeah.
The Communist Manifesto doesn't say workers of America unite, but fuck Europe.
Right. Which is, kind of one of the problems with a lot of European democratic socialism is that it's fundamentally workers of our country unite, fuck everybody else, including immigrants trying to move here.
That was what ended up happening with the Social Democrats in Germany. This is where the social fascism that the German communists were throwing, the social fascism charge that the German communists were throwing at the Social Democrats in 1931 and 1932 came from. So the Social Democrats had made a decision prior to World War I to support the war effort, despite theoretically being socialists. Said, hey, in order to better socialize our country, we're going to support empire. The German communists didn't like that, and they left the Social Democratic Party because of it. Before World War I, there was one socialist party in Germany, and that was the Social Democratic Party.
Right.
When World War I broke out, that was the beginning of a separate German Communist Party. And that's where the whole idea of social fascism comes from, that break. And the fact that in 1919, after World War I was over, one of the first things that the Social Democratic Party did was help put down a communist uprising and kill Rosa Luxemburg. And they hired right-wing thugs to do it.
Yep.
The gentleman who ordered the murders of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht then joined Werner Kapp the following year to try to take over the whole government. And these were the people that the Social Democrats had aligned with to protect a liberal democracy that did not serve all of its people. And then in 1925, they lost to Hindenburg, who was elected president as a right-winger. It's very important to understand that Hindenburg was elected as the far right bring the Kaiser back candidate in 1925. And that in 1931, the party that he beat for the presidency, the Social Democrats, were supporting Himmler for president, not Himmler, Hindenburg for president, on the basis, well, at least he's not Hitler. They decided not to run their own candidate, but they entered into a coalition with the conservatives. And then, after entering into a coalition with the conservatives, they refused to enter into a coalition with the communists to prevent Hitler from becoming chancellor. People try to blame the communists for that, but that is not how it happened. The communists asked the Social Democrats to run their own candidate and promised to support them. And if they didn't want to run their own candidate, would they support the communist candidate? And the Social Democrats said, no, we're not going to run our own candidate and we're not going to support the communist candidate, and ended up actually helping to elect Hitler. And it wasn't even a clear win for Hitler. It was a disputed election. Hitler did not capture the majority. He was made chancellor by a choice. And who made the choice to make Hitler chancellor? President Hindenburg chose Hitler for chancellor over all the other candidates.
Ridiculous.
And that's why the invasion of the Capitol reminds me nothing so much as the Reichstag fire.
Yeah.
Particularly with Democrats and the Capitol Police and everyone saying, no, we don't need more cops. We don't need more security. We don't need more National Guard. What could possibly go wrong? I wonder. Of course, from their point of view, nothing went wrong. None of them were hurt. None of them were killed.
Yeah.
1 cop and 4 protesters was the body count. No Congress people. I have a great deal of individual sympathy for people having to hide, but I have a hard time believing that they were in more danger than a lot of ordinary people are in every day.
And I mean, I think it's worth acknowledging that when AOC says something like, I didn't know which of my colleagues to trust in that moment, that's something we should all be thinking about.
Yes,
that is, you know, that is significant information. Does it mean that, you know, blah, blah, blah? Not necessarily, but
I'll be honest. What concerns me the most is still the fact that the only Congress people who got harmed caught COVID from their Republican colleagues. But I mean, people were hiding without their masks despite having COVID. I mean, sheesh. But yeah. And that feeds back into this, because this guy first came to fame making a big speech in Michigan, where he was part of the anti-mask movement that tried to kidnap the governor. I don't like Gretchen Whitmer, but I don't think she needs to be kidnapped and executed.
That was a bit much.
Seems excessive. So this is where I want to try to get a couple of the things I talked up. Coalitions are important. The left isn't going to win without a coalition of some kind. But who you make the coalition with matters.
Yeah.
There's what you call a popular front, which is a coalition between leftists and liberals. And the idea of the popular front is liberals aren't great, but you can influence liberals more than you can influence conservatives or the fash. That's what leftists have been doing for a while, and it's not really working. Or at least it doesn't feel like it's working to a lot of leftists. Let's put it that way. Then you've got the United Front, which is we're going to come together with all the other leftists, not liberals, but all the other leftists. And we're going to try to put together something that can be electorally competitive, even if we can't win the presidency tomorrow. And that's not a bad strategy. That's something I would really love to see happen. I'm not super optimistic about it, but I don't see it happening immediately. We have a lot of arguments, even beyond trying to get the Trotskyists to get along with anyone else. You have to start by somehow reconciling the anarchists and the Stalinists, and that's a heavy lift.
Yeah.
But all that aside, if you could do that, that seems like that's something that is worth doing, because at least everybody has the same basic values, even if they disagree on methods. But then you have what's called a cross front. There's never actually been a real cross front. Cross front is the idea that people love to talk about on Twitter, about the far left and the far right getting together around something like ending imperialism or abolishing the police or ending war. Now, this has never successfully happened. There's never actually been a quote unquote red-brown alliance of the sort that people talk about. There's never been a real cross front. It's a myth. But for some reason, people keep talking about it. And the closest thing that there has ever been to a cross front is that there were some people who, in a half-assed, conservative, aristocratic way, really were anti-capitalists and were affiliated with the Nazi Party. But they were not socialists by any of the standards that we would use. They were not left. They wanted to replace capitalism with something more like noblesse oblige, with a welfare state, but an authoritarian and not necessarily pleasant system. They still wanted to kill the same people Hitler wanted to kill. They were willing to support Hitler. But Hitler killed all of them on what was called the Night of the Long Knives. Because even that level of anti-capitalism didn't work with a fascist system.
No.
You can't merge corporate and state power and be anti-capitalist.
The end result of every attempted cross front is that the more left-leaning side of that cross front gets betrayed.
Pretty much, yes.
Because the more right-leaning side of that cross front tends to be deceivers. Fascism is a politics of deception. And leftists, on the other hand, tend to be slightly more moral and honest and try to do what they say they're going to do. And when you put those two together, one of those people gets betrayed.
And it's usually not the people who lie less.
So, yeah, there's not going to be a red-brown alliance that lasts more for a couple of months before the left is betrayed. That's just what's going to happen in those situations.
And the more power that alliance is able to gain, the more likely the left is to be dead and not just embarrassed.
Because fascists don't share power. That's something I think some of these people are a little confused about. The types of people that we're talking about, these ANCAPs and fascists, they don't share power. ANCAPs explicitly don't believe in sharing power at all. It's fundamental to their philosophy, is that they shouldn't have to share power with anyone for any reason. That is the fundamental ANCAP philosophy.
Yep.
If those people claim they are going to share power with you, they are planning to step over your corpse later.
It's true. And now we've come full circle, and we're back to how ANCAP is fascism, which is the perfect place to sort of wrap up. I apologize. This ended up being longer than I told Kennedy it would be.
It's okay. I'll forgive you.
And I appreciate everyone else hanging in with us. There's one last thing I'm going to call attention to. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. No, it's not true. The one thing that everyone who got together for the French Revolution had at the beginning was, we need a better system. And then they all killed each other and ended up with a military dictator who actually crowned himself emperor and tried to join the established royalty of the world. So no, the enemy of my enemy is not always my friend. Sometimes the enemy of my enemy wants to use me and fuck me over.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think people could stand to learn from the idea of allyship and what that means. And, people who rely on allies for their safety, which is something I completely understand because that's my situation. If I don't know that my allies are going to keep me safe, then I have to maybe make different decisions sometimes than I would otherwise and things like that. If you have to rely on your allies for safety, that they're not necessarily going to be perfect. Especially because by the nature of them being allies, they aren't in the group and don't fully understand what you're going through. And so sometimes they're not going to be perfect, but you've trusted that they are going to keep you safe. My allies are my friends. That's it. That's as far as it goes. If you cannot prove that you are a safe ally, then no, it doesn't matter if you share some common beliefs.
Well, I think that's something that everybody should remember, is that if you are claiming to be left, then you are claiming comradeship with others. How do we treat our comrades? And I think that's something that we can all think about on our way out tonight. And thank you again, Kennedy, for joining me at the last minute. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody else, for putting up with us going long. And I hope everybody has a great night. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast, and I hope you guys have a good one. I'll be back next week.